All right, Shalom. I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth. Shalom to the hopeful elect. I'm back with another quick lesson through the Holy Spirit, the Rakakwadash. And I pray that this quick lesson is edifying to the hopeful elect. I came across this article here from theeconomist.com in which I want to add some more to it, but you have to be subscribed to go into it. But based off this title here, it says Europe could be torn apart by new divisions, right? It says the continent is at its most vulnerable in decades, all right? So I was thinking about the prophecy in Daniel, the second chapter, where it talks about how the kingdom that was made of part iron and part clay will become divided, all right? Going into pretty much America, NATO, and the EU being divided amongst each other, all right? Which ties into the fall of the revival of Rome. Okay, this beast system is about to go down, all right? Because this is where we're at now, as I got pulled up here. All right, we're in this time of the feet in the 10 toes, all right, which is the revival of the Roman Empire, which is being exercised by America, NATO, and the EU. Okay, so I want to go into also many reasons why, or I should say, many reasons that tie into why Europe is being divided. Okay, to add on to the prophecy, right? So we're going to start off in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, and verse 24. And it reads, it says, Therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Verse 25, And then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. Verse 28, But there is a power in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, which shall come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee which shall come to pass. Verse 30, But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. The point, verse 31, the king's dream, right? Daniel 2 and 31, it says, Thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. So this is what Daniel saw in the vision as he was breaking it down to King Nebuchadnezzar about his dream. All right. This is that great image, that statue, right? Verse 32, it says, The image's head was of fine gold, which represents the Babylonian Empire. It said his arms of silver, all right, which represents the Medo-Persian Empire, all right? So you have the head of gold, the Babylonians, the silver, okay, the Medo-Persian Empire. It says his belly and thighs of brass, all right, which represents the Grecian Empire. Okay, that's the brass. It says, verse 33, Daniel 2 and 33, it says, his legs iron, all right, the iron represent the Roman Empire, and it says his feet, and his feet part iron and part clay, which ties in to the point, ties into the revived Roman Empire, okay, which goes into pretty much NATO and the EU, okay, America, NATO, and the EU. Okay, that revival of Rome. Okay, and this is where we are now. That part iron and part clay, the feet, the 10 toes. Right. Let's read on. Verse 34. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and break them to pieces. And this is future prophecy. All right. That stone that was cut out without hands represents Yahweh Shai, man. And he's coming to pretty much smite the feet. Okay, the feet represent the end of the body. All right, so once the feet go, the whole body follows. All right, and that's Yahweh Shai coming to pretty much conquer the nations, man. All right. It says verse 35. It says, then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together. All right, meaning all the heathen nations are going to fall. It says, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, meaning the Lord is going to completely destroy these nations, right? And the wind carried them away. All right, that nuclear destruction, okay, which is going to be tied into the end of this current rulership. There it says that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain. All right, going into the kingdom of heaven being established on earth. All right, that great mountain representing the kingdom of Israel. Okay, that's going to rule the planet. Okay, when Yahweh Shai sets up the kingdom, and that stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. See, verse 36. It says, "This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king." Verse 37. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the power of heaven have given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven have he given into thy hand, and have made thee ruler over all of them. Thou art this head of gold. All right, going into the Babylonian Empire. Okay. It says Medo-Persian and Greece. All right. So it's breaking it down of these different metals here. All right. It says Daniel 2:39. It says, and after these shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over the earth. So remember, all these different empires, all these different beasts had their period of time, to rule on the earth, right? It says, verse 40, it says, in the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, all right, the Roman Empire. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. All right, the point, verse 41. It says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. All right, so as I was saying earlier, right, America, NATO, and the EU would become divided. That's prophecy here, right? It says, and whereas, Daniel 2:41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there should be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. So as we're talking about here, okay, these nations that's part of the EU would eventually become divided, as we're seeing here. Now, like I said earlier, I have some more information to tie into it because I couldn't read the whole article, but I have pulled it on the AI here, right? And let's read it here, right? So it goes into it. It says, matter of fact, let's read some more before we read this, Slakia. So Daniel 2:42, it says, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and broken. So again, these EU nations are pretty much, falling apart. They're becoming divided. And like I said, there's many reasons why, okay, the EU is becoming divided, which I wanted to read here, right? Let's go back. So it says current divisions in Europe. It says Europe is facing significant challenges that threaten its unity. See? Historically, divisions were based on clear lines such as fiscal policies and migration. However, recent crises have complicated these divisions, making them harder to manage, right? Because one of the big things that had the European Union divided was immigration and taxes, right? Same things that are going on here in America. It says key factors contributed to divisions: geopolitical tensions. It says the war in Ukraine and the shifting dynamics with the United States have created uncertainty. Europe must navigate its relationship with a U.S. that increasingly views it as a competitor, right? National egoism. Countries like Germany have become less proactive in shaping EU policies, often acting as a brake on collective action. This has led to frustration among other member states. This is why they're all fighting and becoming divided. It says inaction on reforms. The fear of division has resulted in paralysis within the EU. National interests often override collective goals, making it difficult to achieve necessary reforms, right? It says the need for a multi-speed Europe. To address these challenges, a multi-speed Europe may be necessary. This approach allows willing states to advance in key areas such as defense, digitalization, and technology, while others may lag behind. All right, so you have pretty much the poorer states of the European Union are going to be left behind. All right, it says, and I'll read this last part. It says benefits of enhanced cooperation, flexibility. States can move forward on urgent issues without waiting for consensus from all members. Increased influence. Smaller states can gain more power through coalitions, enhancing their role in European decision making. Strategic partnerships, enhanced cooperation can open doors for collaboration with non-EU partners, strengthening Europe's global position, right? So these are some of the factors here. Here's some more before we go back to the read, all right? Because I was just thinking about all of this based off the title from this article that we read, right? About the Europe being torn apart by new divisions, right? Here's some more, right? This is back from when was this? This is back in 2022. It says Europe accuses U.S. of profiting from war. It says EU officials attacked Joe Biden over sky-high gas prices, weapons sales, and trade as Vladimir Putin's war threatens to destroy Western unity, right? So remember what happened back then. You had the Nord Stream pipelines that got blown up, right? And those pipelines were responsible for providing gas and energy to Europe, right? I just want to read here, which was another stain, on America, which is causing that divide amongst America, NATO, and the EU, right? Right here, the point. It says, last June, the Navy divers operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22 planted the remotely trigger explosives that 3 months later destroyed the 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Hearst reported, adding, 2 of the pipelines, which were known collectively as Nord Stream 1 had been providing Germany and much of Western Europe with cheap Russian natural gas for more than a decade. A second pair of pipelines called Nord Stream 2 had been built, but they were not yet operational. Now, with Russian troops massing on the Ukrainian border in the bloodiest war in Europe since 1945 looming, President Joseph Biden saw the pipelines as a vehicle for Vladimir Putin to weaponize natural gas for his political and territorial ambitions, right? So this is why America pretty much blew him up. And that hurt Europe, man. Okay, those Europeans, they were pissed off about that, right? Nord Stream 2 is designed to deliver Russian gas directly to Germany under the Baltic Sea, bypassing Ukraine. It says if finished, the 1,230 kilometer pipeline will become one of the longest offshore gas pipelines in the world. Alongside several European countries, the U.S. opposes the pipeline, calling it a quote bad deal for European energy security. See that? So this is why they blew it up. So the point, all these things are tying in to that division. Okay, and many other factors, right? Back in this article here, all right, about Europe accuses U.S. of profiting from war. It says 9 months after invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is beginning to fracture the West. Top European officials are furious with Joe Biden's administration and now accuse the Americans of making a fortune from the war while EU countries suffer. See? Quote, the fact is, if you look at it soberly, the country that is most profiting from this war is the U.S. because they are selling more gas at higher prices and because they are selling more weapons, one senior official told Politico. The explosive comments backed in public and private by officials, diplomats, and ministers elsewhere following mounting anger in Europe over American subsidies that threaten to wreck European industry. The Kremlin is likely to welcome the poisoning of the atmosphere among Western allies, right? So, and the point reads on. So, what I'm making is that all these factors contribute to the division of Europe, man, alongside the immigration and, the taxes that's going on, man. Okay? But this is all the prophecy. That's why I wanted to point that out, right? And another factor before we read on, this is Revelation chapter 17 and verse 16. It says, in the 10 horns, all right, which represents the EU nations, which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, all right, speaking about America, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Because pretty much we're coming into that time where these European nations are going to turn their back on America, man. Okay, they're gonna turn their back and they're gonna make allies against America, man. Okay, because a lot of this stuff, pretty much a lot of shit that America, that Europe is going through, is because of America. Okay, as we read in the article, a lot of the suffering that Europe is suffering is because of America in this war. Okay, so they're going to start turning to other allies. They're going to make those backdoor deals with Russia, and they're going to turn their backs on the whore, and they're going to burn this place, man. Okay, so that all ties into that division as well, right? But let's go back. Okay, Daniel 2 and verse 42 again. It says in the toes, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they should not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So that's, again, we're talking about the division amongst those European nations. Okay, and like the scriptures say in Mark, right? Was it Mark 3 and 25? It says, if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand but have an end. So this is pretty much the end as I was going into earlier, all right, we're approaching the end of this revival of Rome, this beast, man. All right, part iron and part clay. It's divided and it's going to fall apart, right? Daniel 2:44 says, in the days of these kings shall the power of heaven set up a kingdom which should not be destroyed, and the kingdom shall be left to other people, should not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. This is talking about the kingdom of heaven, when Yahushua comes and establish the kingdom on earth. For as much as thou sawest the stone, as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and in breaking pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great power have made known to the king which shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. All right, so that's pretty much the point, man. So that's what I was thinking about. You know, eventually, as we're seeing it here, you know, these nations, they're divided and they're going to fall. America, NATO, and the EU is going to fall and be destroyed eventually, man. And that's the time we in, you know. So, you know, I pray this lesson was edifying. Not that I was all over the place, but just wanted to make them points. Shalom to the next one. Shalom.